I want to introduce you to another member of the San Jacinto Battleground Conservancy. This is Leslie Barrs. Leslie is an attorney, but also a preservation advocate too. Are you still the president of the bridge, the antique bridge?
I've actually rotated off the
board.
Historic Bridge Foundation of America, but still very involved.
Well, and that is a wonderful group. It really is. But Leslie, we have used Leslie, and she has been such a great friend to us, to explain to us some of the federal laws that deal with, even though this is a state historic site, it is also a national historic landmark. So one of the things that the laws are very complicated. I understand you understand them very well. And that's one of the things I think that's been somewhat disturbing. I had mentioned earlier to the audience that we had actually applied for consulting party status in 2014 and heard nothing.
Right. So, are we having a conversation?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Yes, we are. And that's unusual, isn't it?
It is unusual. You know, this federal law was adopted in 1966 with the express purpose of having federal agencies consult with other agencies and people who are interested in historic preservation before taking actions that could possibly harm historic properties. Right. And so it's not just to stand up and speak at the podium, it's actually a process where you sit down and try to come to some consensus on how the property is going to be studied and what precautions could be put in place.
And it may be more than one conversation. It may be several conversations, several meetings.
It's been my experience with projects as large as this one, with nationally significance, that it usually does take several meetings.
Right.
And so to have the Corps completely ignore our letter is unusual, and to not at least allow the Conservancy to come in and have their voice heard is highly unusual and very inconsistent with the law.
Right. Well, and I think we've been involved with your help through several of these, and we were shocked as well. But now, is this law administered by the Advisory Council of Historic Preservation, or is it Congress, or who actually is I hate to say the power, but who is the power?
Enforcer?
Yes, the enforcer. Thank you.
Well, every federal agency has its own mandate to comply with this law. There is a federal agency over historic preservation, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. We have contacted them with our concerns about this situation.
Now, is this an appointed board, a citizen board,
It is actually a federal agency that has a board that is appointed and by the president, and then there's some statutory membership. But it represents a wide variety of viewpoints. And we believe that given the national significance of this resource, they may themselves choose to participate and come into the process, as they should.
Right. Well, now I think, and I know you're well aware that 2010, San Jacinto was put on Preservation Texas Most Endangered list. Part of that was because of the industrial encroachment. Part of it was because we do not review consistently our plans for preservation, and that's something that needs to be done, and we've had a dialogue and opening a dialogue, I hope, with Texas Parks and Wildlife on that. But it's also, in a project that's complicated, we also have air laws, water laws, and other things as well. And that's one of the reasons we're here tonight, is to find out if indeed those have been,
who's been paying attention.
Exactly.
Well, and that's a good point. The Army Corps itself should have done an environmental review under federal law to evaluate the potential health impacts to humans from disposing of sediment from an industrial ship channel over this area, where you've got a high likelihood of human exposure, both potential future archaeologists as well as the public.
Right, because I think some of the literature that I've seen, you've got actually where they're going to be building a boardwalk over this area. And that would definitely, you're going to have people. And the marsh, we pointed out that phase one part of the marsh, that, to my knowledge, is a very well visited site.
Oh, I'm sure. Birders
Yeah,
and
exactly.
recreationists.
And that's there are a lot of birders out here, and it's
Right.
been wonderful what the marsh has been able to do to bring back habitat species that have not been in the park for a long, long time.
Right.
But I'm not sure when we're going to be cutting to our.
If you want to cut now, I'll just wait for the meeting to start. Or
I think actually, I want to thank you for allowing us to have this opportunity to speak our mind. We are going to listen very, very respectfully to what is said, ask questions, and I hope that the greater good is going to be served from all of this, because San Jacinto is so important. And like I said before, without San Jacinto, there would not be the Texas that we know today. So thank you, Mark, and thank you, Houston Media Source.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Bill Irwin. I'm the superintendent for the San Jacinto State Historic Site Complex. I want to welcome you all here tonight. We're going to have some information about our marsh restoration project that we have going on. In a few minutes, I'm going to invite Brent Leisure up to say a few things at the start, but first some housekeeping matters. You may have noticed we're doing some construction around the monument tonight. Ladies' room is through the back door and right there immediately outside the door. Men's room, you're gonna have to hike a little bit out this front door and down to the first terrace. There are some porta potties there. That's due to our construction project, so please bear with us. But we are happy that you're here tonight and want to let you know what we have going on here at San Jacinto. That I'll introduce Brent.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, for me to be here. I always love coming back to this magnificent site, and we welcome you here. I want you to know that your Texas state parks and take great pride in being able to steward over this site and make it accessible to the public, and as best we can, convey the significance of this site to future generations of Texans as they come forward. And we're here tonight to talk about a project that obviously is of interest to you in the Marsh Restoration Project. It's a continuing phased project, and this is the most current phase of a project that started some time ago. We've had many partners in this along the way, and a great deal of support, and we appreciate your interest. There's something that it's probably very obvious, but I would just like to point it out, is that we have a lot in common. We have a love for Texas history. We have a passion for this site. Being good stewards and protectors of this site, guardians over this very special place, and carrying that legacy on to future generations is of great importance to us. We have a kind of a mantra within our organization that we desire to do no harm to the resources that we are privileged to protect. And I appreciate your passion and your interest in coming forward tonight and helping us to tell the story of Texas history and the magnificent events that took place here in 1836. So I have with me, joining me, many members of our team at Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, a crew I'll tell you that I have great confidence in, subject matter experts that are cover the entire spectrum of disciplines that we think are so important to put our best foot forward on a project like this here at San Jacinto. And I'll just read the list because I want to make sure I don't forget anyone. But Dr. Michael Strutt is head of our Cultural Resource Program, director of that program for the State Parks of Texas. Justin Rhodes, Justin, who you heard from just a minute ago, is the regional director responsible for the operations of parks in this area of the state. Andy Sipix, and Andy you're going to hear from Andy in just a few minutes. He's essentially our project manager for the marsh restoration, and Andy is the biologist that's responsible for helping us to coordinate all natural resource related projects in this region of the state. Ruth Matthews, Ruth is our archaeologist for this region, whose responsibilities extend to this site. Dr. Cindy Brandemar, and Cindy is head of our Historic Sites program for the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Kevin Good, a special assistant to me and works in a number of different ways on special projects. So welcome, Kevin. Tom Harvey, who is with our communications division. Tom is in the back, and you'll see him with a cap. And so we come here tonight with great expectation to hear from you. But before that, I would just like our team to be able to present what we believe is some details about a project that we're very proud of, and a project that we think is going to put us in a position to better tell the story to future generations of Texans about the significance of the events that took place here. And I understand that people have different opinions, but there's something that we have in common, and that's our love and passion for this site and for the history of Texas. And I would like for us to embark on a conversation, a dialogue this evening that one that respects the voices of others and the opinions of others. I certainly will extend that to you, and I hope that you will to us. And hear the preview and essentially the details of a project that we think we've done our due diligence. We think that we have done enough research to understand that we're going to do no harm in this project, but there's actually going to be an added value to it at the end. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Some of it will be verbal, some of it will be very visual, and we'll be able to look back in time and see how things have changed. Obviously, this site has radically changed over the years. And so our goal is to develop a landscape that reflects that as best we can to that 1836 battle time. And so with that, I'll just turn it back over to Bill, and Bill's going to provide us an overview of the history of the site and the battle itself for those that may not be aware. Okay, thanks, Bill.
Many of you folks here are very familiar with the Battle of San Jacinto, so I'm going to make this relatively brief. Just to let you know where we are in this site. This map is an 1856 map. It's commonly known as the Yoakum map. It was published, probably one of the earliest published maps of the battle itself. We feel it does represent well the site and the battle that took place. The Mexican army arrived at San Jacinto along the New Washington Road. The Texas Army arrived along the Harrisburg Road and encamped in this area. This is what we call in the park now the Texan camp. This would be the Mexican camp, and they set up their defenses here. The afternoon of April 21st, as the Texans advanced, they advanced across this plain, and the Texan army first contacted the Mexican army in this area and began a panic. Troops in this area did not put up much of a resistance and started to retreat that way toward the New Washington Road. They're trying to get away. About the time these troops started retreating, the main Texas Army hit the main Mexican line. General confusion ensued. There was some resistance put up, especially at the center of the line, but very shortly that crumbled and the general retreat began. So Mexican soldiers are running for their lives, and they're running this way. They're trying to get to the New Washington Road. The Texas Cavalry is coming this way to block them off. They're having to go over what's called this low ground and through Boggy Bayou. Eventually, those that survived made it down into this area and were able to come together enough and start surrendering in larger groups to survive. So the majority of the battle took place from this line over into here. And this is where those Mexican casualties were. They were left where they fell, and their remains were not addressed until several years later, when what was left was collected up and buried. We don't know exactly where, somewhere on the site. So that's a general overview of the battle. I'm going to turn it over to Andy so he can tell you a little bit about our restoration project.
You might have to click this by hand, Bill. Sorry. It's my aura. Okay, so this is the general project area. The yellow, this is a current aerial photo of the site. The yellow line is the boundary of the state historic site. The area in red is the area of interest. The area in blue is our proposed or our ongoing marsh restoration project area. This is the Boggy Bayou area that Bill was pointing out just a minute ago. Sorry, Bill. Can we go back? This is the San Jacinto River, Houston Ship Channel, and here is Buffalo Bayou. Thank you. Next slide. So why are we doing this? This area, if you're from here, you may be aware of it, you may not be aware of it, but the Houston area has subsided quite a bit. This is from groundwater pumping. During World War II and shortly after that, industries along the Houston Ship Channel grew at quite a rapid rate, and the water they used for their industrial processes, as well as the water the city of Houston was pulling out for drinking water, was being pumped out of the ground. And because of the geology of the Houston area, as the water was pumped out, the land actually began sinking. And this is a map created by the Houston Galveston Subsidence District, just showing how much the land has sunk. So down here at the west end of Galveston Island, we've had about a foot. Here in Texas City, it's sunk about 6 feet because there's an industrial area there and they were pumping a lot out. And here around the monument, there's been about 8 to 10 feet of subsidence. And subsidence happens, throughout the world. You may have heard about it in Central California or in Arizona, where they pump a lot of water out for irrigation. However, in the Houston area, because we're right next to the ocean, as the land subsided, the sea actually came in up over the land. And if you recall the battle map that you saw, there's a large area of marsh wrapping around the battlefield. Because of subsidence, that area has all been submerged beneath the level of the tide, and our goal here is to try to restore the landscape as it once looked. Next slide. Again, there we go. So here's that same battle map, the Yoakum map, 1856, and I've got overlain on this is the boundary of the state historic site. Here is Santa Ana's Marsh. This is what we're restoring. Here's the Boggy Bayou area. This is Lake Anna Maria Francisco, otherwise known as Peggy Lake, again because the Texans won. This is no longer here. This is a core upland disposal area, and prior to our work, most of this marsh had subsided below sea level and was just open water. Next slide. This is a 1920 one-foot topographic map. This shows the park just prior to the initiation of severe subsidence. So if you look at this map, it's a topographic map. Each of these lines represents an area of equal elevation. So the way to read this map is if you're walking, say, from here up in this direction, you're actually going up slope. You're climbing up a foot at a time, a foot here, a foot, another foot. So this is really the highest portion of the park is just right in this area here. Here is the Boggy Bayou area. Here's the tidal marsh. It's shown as blue because it's actually below sea level at the time this map was made, Lake Santa Ana. And you can already see that at this time the San Jacinto River and Buffalo Bayou were being dredged for shipping, and the material dug out of the channel was being placed. That's what these little mounds are here, just being placed immediately adjacent to the ship channel. Next slide. Okay, here's the same area. The yellow again is the boundary of the historic site. This is a 1930 aerial photo. This is the earliest aerial photograph we have of the park site. And you can see by this time, roads had been constructed on the battlefield to allow visitors easy access to the area. More dredging had occurred in the San Jacinto River for deeper ships. So you can see the white is where sand and other material dug out of the ship channel was being placed into the marsh. The monument has not been constructed yet. Will be in this area, and here is the Boggy Bayou area. You can see just a little hint of a little marsh there. That is the Boggy Bayou Marsh. Next slide. Okay, this is in 1951. Again, we're looking at the same exact area the monument is in, as well as the reflecting pool. And what you see here, this white, by 1951, the Corps of Engineers constructed a levee to impound the Santa Ana Marsh area so they could fill it with dredge material being pumped out of the river. This material is being hydraulically dredged. So the way they would deepen the ship channel is take a dredge. It's a machine, a boat that has a large 30-inch pipe, and at the mouth of the pipe is a cutter head, and that is placed down into the bottom of the ship channel. It's cutting away, loosening up the soil and clay. And on board the ship are some really large suction pumps. And so they're sucking through that pipe all of that clay and water and mud and sand, and they're discharging it out of another pipe, a slurry of mud, into their disposal area. And what they've done is they've excavated a channel here along the park shoreline. So as they pump in here, the sand and mud is settling out into the disposal area, and then the water is flowing down the channel and on out into Peggy Lake. And that, you can see that here. Here's the Boggy Bayou area. Here's an old causeway that used to cross Boggy Bayou. Next slide, please. So this is a relatively recent photo, 1996. This was taken immediately prior to the initiation of marsh restoration. So by that time, the area here had sunk so much that even the area the Corps had filled up with about 10 feet of dredge material is slightly below sea level. You can see it's actually exposed at low tide. The original mounds of sand that were dug out of the channel are still located here, and that's why you've got forest there now. You got trees growing on it instead of marshland. Here's the Boggy Bayou area, and by this time that causeway that used to run across the mouth of the bayou is completely submerged because of the subsidence. And a new causeway has been constructed as far upstream as we can get without going off of our park property. This was, at the time this road was built, we did not actually, the state did not own this land here. Next slide. So here's a current aerial photo. This is the area of marsh that we've restored already. This is our phase 1 project. This was done in 1997. And it was actually built the same way the Corps first dredged the channel, and that the material was dug out of the channel here with the suction dredge and placed into a contained area. However, just enough material was put in there to create an elevation that would be intertidal. In other words, inundated at high tide, exposed at low tide, and the vegetation is salt marsh vegetation, and this would be similar to what grew in that area at the time of the battle. And we actually have already begun phase 2. This was begun around 2000, and a portion of the phase 2 area was filled at that time. Now we have not, the project has not moved forward since 2000 because we've been looking for suitable material to go in there. We have to have material that is not contaminated with any kind of pollutants. We have to find material that is of the right consistency, and we have to find a company that is going to dredge this for us at no cost to the state. And we have now found a company willing to do that. They're located about 6 miles south of here downstream at Barber's Cut, which is right north of Morgan's Point. Next slide, please. So this is the area we've already restored to marsh. This area as well. This is the phase 1 project. This is the phase 2. We've restored this area as well. The hashed area is what we're now working to restore to marshland. Next slide, please. So now what I've done is I want to concentrate on the Boggy Bayou area to better explain what we're going to do and the changes that are going to occur. So this again, this is the Yoakum map, the 1856 battle map. Here's the Santa Ana Marsh, here's the Boggy Bayou area, and on the battle map they show Boggy Bayou and they show a low area as well here. What I've done is I've overlain topographic contours onto this old battle map. These contours come from the first detailed land survey that was done of the battleground. It was done by the Corps of Engineers in 1913, so well prior to subsidence. And I've taken the contours and laid them onto the old map, and they do line up fairly well. You can see you've got the 1913 area indicates an area that was inundated at high tide, and it is right down at the lower end of Boggy Bayou. Here's that old causeway. I've also put on the roads, the old roads, onto that Yoakum map that existed at the time of the 1913 survey. And you can see the topographic lines. The topo map shows a low swell here with water running down it, and it lines up pretty good with the low boggy area, the low ground shown in the map. It's not a perfect match because the 1856 is a hand-drawn map. It wasn't done by a survey crew. It was somebody probably pacing off and doing the best they can, but it does indicate that yes, Boggy Bayou, the Boggy Bayou shown on that 1856 map is definitely the Boggy Bayou that we have named Boggy Bayou today, and the low ground here is the low ground associated with this swell here. Next slide, please. Here is the 1913 topographic map done by the Corps of Engineers. This blue line that you see here, this faint blue line, this is our current marsh restoration project area. And it also lines up fairly well with this old topographic map. So this is the area we're talking about restoring to marsh. And you can see in the old Corps map, it indicates that that was marsh at that time. Next slide, please. What I've done now is we're moving forward in time. This is the same contour lines off that 1913 map in the same area of high tide inundation, and this is overlain onto that 1930 aerial photo that we have. Here is Santa Ana's Bayou running through, and you can tell this is tidal marsh. And we've got a culvert here, and this is where the tidal water comes in. You see this dark area? That indicates that this is water. That's tidal water. That's seawater that comes in and out and inundates this portion of Boggy Bayou at low tide. These other areas are a mix of marsh and what's called salty prairie or saline prairie. You may have heard of saltgrass, like the famous Saltgrass Steakhouse. Well, they're talking about these areas of real low ground that are not inundated daily by the tide, but they're inundated enough during storms that the soil is salty and the grass that grows there is pretty unique. Next slide, please. So we have the same contours and the same of the 1913 map now overlain onto a 1951 aerial photo. And at this time, you can see the Corps dumping dredged material in here. The land has started to subside. This area here is now open water instead of marsh, and this, instead of just the tide being restricted to this, the tide is now reaching back up into this area as well. The old road that was first built here, you can see the trace of it has now been abandoned because it's getting too low. And this causeway here is being raised at this point to keep it above the level of the tide. The ground here, it's 1951, so the severe subsidence episode is really starting to kick in at this time. Next slide, please. So here are the same contour intervals. We've just leaked now to 1964. The Corps of Engineers have now built their disposal area right up to the mouth of Boggy Bayou, right up to the shoreline of the park. And they've dredged this area out here to act as a drainage for their disposal site. And because of subsidence, you can see the tide is now inundated a much larger area. It's even beyond this causeway has now been constructed because this causeway is starting to go underwater quite a bit. So the causeway that's present today is now in place, and you can see the tidal water is actually reaching beyond it. Next slide, please. So here we are in 1996. This is just prior to the initiation of our first phase of the restoration. And you can see the tide now has reached, inundated all of the low ground on this map and actually extends to the modern Park Road. And the water extends well beyond the causeway. Now notice that the blue line here is our proposed restoration area. So there is tidal water even beyond that. And what has happened is between 96 and the present day is this open water area here is silted in with sediment, and this is now already turned into marsh and in some cases forest. The causeway that was across the mouth of Boggy Bayou has now been abandoned. The other roads that were here at the time the park was first established are also well underwater. And even the area the Corps disposed in, even though they've raised this repeatedly with dredge material, because the area subsided so much, it's also underwater, though you can still see the old Corps of Engineers confinement levee right through here a little bit. Next slide, please. Here we are in 2014, the latest photo that we have. And again, just showing the current conditions of the site. And you can see that the area I referred to, the tide used to reach all the way back here, but just from rainfall, it's been bringing in dirt and mud into this area, and it's starting to fill this in because around 1990, Houston realized that we're sinking, we've got to put a stop to this, so they stopped pumping out groundwater and they've gone to surface water. They built Lake Houston, they built Lake Livingston, so now the water for the industry and for the city itself is coming from the rivers. They're not pumping it out of the ground anymore. And so the land has stopped subsiding, it stopped sinking, and just the natural flow of sediment into the tidewater here is starting to fill these areas back in. Next slide, please. So if we look at today's water elevation, it does generally line up with between the 9 and 12 foot contour elevation shown on the old Corps of Engineers map. And that makes sense because we've had 8 to 10 feet of subsidence in this area. I think about 10 feet at the monument. So you would expect the water to come up between the 9 and 12 foot contours, and it does. So we can be pretty confident that yes, we do understand what's going on here with subsides and how much the land has sunk. Next slide, please. So to get a better idea of this, when we did the phase 1 restoration, my predecessor, Ted Hollingsworth, went out in a boat, and he did a quick depth survey of all of the restoration site to see how deep it was, because we know that once subsidence started and this area became inundated with the tide, we had mud coming off of the Corps disposal events. We had mud just coming in from the tide. We had mud coming down from the upland prairie area. So we knew this area was being filled in, and we needed to know, well, how much dirt do we have to put in there to raise it to marsh elevation? It's, how many cubic yards of material need to be brought in. So Ted did this survey, and he found that even the area that was below sea level here, even though it subsided an additional 10 feet, so it should be like maybe 12 feet of water there, he found only about 2 to 3 feet of water, and that was in the early 1990s. So when we were interested in continuing with phase 2, we wanted to see, well, is it filled in some more? What are the current conditions now? It's been 10 years. So we hired a company to do a detailed bathymetric survey where they did a bunch of transects, and he's got a GPS receiver here. He's getting latitude, longitude, and elevation, and it's accurate to within an inch or so. And he's getting water depth all along these lines. But we had them do something extra, which is use a probe to probe down through the silt that's accumulated onto the original land surface. And they pushed that probe down through the silt until they contacted the original bottom. This would have been the bottom of the ground, or of that where the marsh was just prior to subsidence, say 1940. Between the time of the battle in 1836 and 1940, there was undoubtedly some sediment accumulation, but it would have been slow, and the marsh would have just kept the grass would just keep growing up higher and higher as the ground built up. So when they did the probing, they would have probed through the loose silt down to that and found that 1940 ground level, and that's what we see here in these cross sections. So what these represent is if you were to take a slice through the land, like slicing through a layer cake, going across the bayou here, and just took that slice, that thin slice, and looked at it from the side, this is what you would see. And it's hard for you to see these. I'm going to take a closer look at this one in particular, but each of these lines represents a foot in elevation. So what we've got here, where Boggy Bayou is generally about 8 feet of sediment accumulation. The green line is the bottom, as found by the surveyor in 2007. So the water line is the small line that's difficult to see right up here above the 0 point. So this is the water elevation, then he found the ground elevation here, the green line, and then he pushed the probe down and found the old ground surface here. So we've got a good record of that for this entire area. And what they found in 2007, Ted found 2 to 3 feet of water. In 2007, they found 1 to 2 feet of water. So we'd had about another accumulation of about a foot of silt. Next slide, please. Can you go back, please? What we also did was we took, and just recently, just last year, we also took a number of core samples in this area where you take a pipe about this diameter and you push it down into the ground about 20 feet to get an idea. This was done by an engineering company trying to get an idea of, okay, how loose is that silt? What's going to happen when we put new mud on it? Is the silt just going to squish away, or is the new mud going to be able to build up to the elevation we want that will support marsh? But when they took these cores, we had an archaeologist look in them. They didn't find artifacts, but what they did find is the old ground layer here is well defined by a layer of buried vegetation. And out here, they took cores here as well, and they found multiple layers of vegetation buried under there. And what that represents is each time the core would put new mud in there, grass would grow on it, then they would put more mud on it, grass would grow on that surface, and all those old surfaces are still preserved in those core samples as layers of preserved vegetation. So we're very confident that we have a very good idea of what Boggy Bayou used to look like, what it looks like today, how deeply buried the bottom of the bayou is, and so forth. And when we add material in here, what the behavior of that material is going to be, because our tidal elevation here is only about 8 inches. So if you want a marsh that is inundated at low tide, exposed at high tide, you've got to get, you want to put just enough mud in to reach that kind of perfect elevation. It's a real engineering problem to get that right. Now this method that we're going to employ has been used here at the park in the past and also in Galveston Bay. Because of the subsidence, about 30,000 acres of tidal marsh have been lost around Galveston Bay. And so there's been a big effort to restore marshes using hydraulic dredges. It's really the most practical way to do it on a large basis. About 5,000 acres of marsh have been or in the process of being restored around Galveston Bay. So it's not an experimental technique. Next slide, please. What I'm doing now is I'm showing you the restoration area here with these noted by these the hash marks. This is a close-up of Boggy Bayou, and I've got the old 1913 topographic lines laid on here and the old streams. This is Boggy Bayou itself, as shown on that 1913 map, and here's the other low area. Both of these were noted in the battle map. And I'm going to look at one cross-section, one transect that was taken right across the old intertidal pond and across the old Boggy Bayou marsh here. And it goes from high ground on one side to high ground on the other side. Next slide. And I'm going to show you that cross-section through time. So here it is overlain on the old map, going from the high ground here to the high ground over here. Next slide. Here it is overlain on the Corps of Engineers 1913 topo. Next slide. And here it is in the 1954 map, photograph. Next slide. Here it is on the 60 map, the 60 photo. You can see again the subsidence is getting quite a bit more. Next slide. And here it is again on today's aerial photograph. So it's going from one bank to the other. Next. If we take a detailed look at that, here's the original ground bottom. Each of these is a foot of elevation. Here's the ground elevation in 2007. The blue line is the water level. This is the average water level. Of course, it does change because the area is tidal. Here's the ground level today. So we did a hydrographic survey just recently, and we found that now there's no more than 14 inches of water in this area. So we've had another foot of sedimentation since 2007. So we've now got about 8 feet plus of material in here, and what we're proposing to do is this orange area, this is the material we want to add to bring the current bottom up to the average water level. So the deepest amount of sediment we're talking about is 14 inches here, and that thins out to essentially nothing as you approach the current shoreline. Next slide. So just again, this is what the site looked like prior to restoration in 1996. You could see the open water here. Here's a photo taken of the open water from the monument. This is the core disposal area. This is their confinement levee. Right here, it's just still above water. The rest of the area is all beneath the water. Here's Boggy Bayou. What we did in phase one is we pumped material in using a hydraulic dredge. It's basically a very muddy, very fluid mud when you pump it in. And you have to pump it, when you pump it in, it's mostly water with some sediment mixed in with it. And when it comes out of the pipe, it's going to look pretty bad. It's like a black material, and because it contains a lot of organic matter, and it's been buried beneath the earth for a while. But after it's been exposed for a couple days to oxygen, it turns brown, and then it will eventually dry out and look like any other soil you see. And over a couple years' time, the water will slowly get squished out of that mud that we've pumped in there, and the mud will shrink down below the level of the tide, and at that point it gets planted with marsh grass. And this is what it looks like. This is what this area looked like about 3 years after the project was begun. It becomes a marsh with small ponds and bayous through it, which should resemble pretty closely to what was here in 1836 at the time of the battle. Next slide, please. So this is what we're doing. We're right now constructing this levee. This is the old Corps of Engineers levee right here. We've built on top of it, on top of the Corps levee, and now we're building using dredge material that the Corps had previously placed in here. As we build this levee, we've got core samples all along it, and we know that the original ground surface is about 10 to 13 feet plus below the current level of the current mud line, but we're being very careful to make sure the excavators don't reach any deeper than 4 feet. So we've given ourselves a good 6 feet plus wiggle room to make sure we don't dig into the original ground surface. This is the dredge out there working. These are high flotation excavators. They're on pontoons, and they've got a very wide track. They're built to do this kind of marsh work. They're usually used to put pipelines through marshes. A lot of them come from Louisiana, but as these machines are tracking from this point here across, they're leaving ruts that are no deeper than about 6 inches because they have a very wide track. If you tried to walk out there, you would probably sink out of sight, but these guys are not. So what they're doing is they're building this confinement levee here. Another small levee will be built here, and because this touches the original shoreline of the battleground, they aren't going to be excavating to build this first half of this levee. They'll just bring material in and lay it onto a tarp or something so it can be completely removed. But they're building, what you see, this dark line, this is going to be a 5-foot contour line. When they first pump material in here, it's going to be mostly water. And they will probably pump it up to about 3 feet above sea level, above the average water level. And it'll be inundate all of this area, and as time goes on, the water will run out and the sediment will it will dewater and shrink, and this area here is where the new mud, the new elevation is going to be gained. We put the levee here because this is not our property, and we didn't want to have any effect on our neighbor's property. Next slide, please. Again, so here's the machine at work. Just run through these, please. You can see the bucket is not going down very deep at all. There's about 1.5 feet of water at the time this slide was taken. This bucket is about 3 feet, 3.5 feet. So we're making sure that he doesn't go anywhere near the original ground surface. Okay. Now I'm going to let Ruth Matthews speak about the site's archaeology.
Hello everyone, I'm Ruth Matthews. I am the Cultural Resource Coordinator for Region 4, and San Jacinto is one of the parks under my care. I'm going to talk to you about the archaeology that's been done here at the park and what we've made of it so far. Is it going to work? Okay. Okay, this is a 1940 aerial photograph. It was taken in January, and all that white stuff you see is snow. Isn't that pretty? Over here, this up here, this is Peggy Lake. Right in here would be the Boggy Bayou. This is one of the features cut by the Corps for whatever purpose they deemed necessary. Okay, next. Okay, so the first slide I'm going to show you, these are all like linear surveys. They're project-driven investigations. Each one of them represents like a pipeline or some sort of buried utility, like water lines, wastewater lines, fiber optic lines, any line that needed to be buried. That's what these lines represent. Almost all of them were associated with some sort of subsurface testing, such as shovel testing, metal detecting and divot testing, or mechanical trenching. All of these projects were coordinated with the Texas Historical Commission or the SHPO, and were conducted by professional archaeologists. Okay, this represent what we call geomorphological investigations. A geomorphological investigation is a tool archaeologists use to understand soil deposition. Each one of these is like an auger probe or a mechanical trench. And so understanding soil deposition is important to archaeologists because it helps us know whether the soil is fill, whether it has been disturbed in some way, or whether it's been truncated or cut off. We look at soils maps and make comparisons between soils maps, and geomorphologists will come out and actually look at the soils, and they have the eye. And they'll be able to tell us what's going on with the soil. And this is going to be very important when we're chasing down the path of the battle. Next. Okay, these are what I call restoration-driven projects. In other words, because we are in the process of trying to return this park to its 1836 landscape as best as possible, as you saw the topography going down into the Boggy Bayou, you must realize that we'll never be able to get it exactly right, but we hope to get it at least to a point where when people go out onto the battleground, they'll be able to understand it through interpretation. So just to give you an idea, this is the prairie restoration. This has been an ongoing project. First, we had to remove it used to look like this. We had to remove all of the invasive species and then let it set for a while, let the chips die down, and then do the metal detecting. It was a metal detecting survey and it was very helpful. It helped us to find intact. We also had geomorphological investigation, like I said, metal detecting and divot investigations, and we also did shovel testing. 10% of all metal detecting hits were investigated with shovel tests as well. So we found out that there were intact soils and that there were some areas where the soils weren't intact, so it was very helpful. This area over here, this was done by just sort of a down and dirty, real fast metal detecting survey. We'll probably go over that area again. And then this area in here, these very uniform squares, this was an area where they did a non-invasive form of archaeology called ground penetrating radar and magnetometer. And they just run a machine over this area and it'll pick up anything, anomalies, we call them anomalies, anything that we think doesn't belong there. And then after they mark all of these on a map, then they'll come back and later, we call truth test them, so to see what was actually there. And so we had a graduate student working in this area for a while in several of these blocks. This is an area where we were looking for various places where we might be able to construct a visitor center. This is another one of those areas, and this is also an area that has been called the Pauper Cemetery. And so what we had here was, you notice it's also very square and laid out. It was also a magnetometer and ground penetrating radar, and what they found was pretty much nothing. Okay, next slide. Okay, these are what I call restoration and preservation projects. Each one of these projects was coordinated with the THC, and I believe I can't go any more than that because they weren't my projects, but I did find the early coordination. And we call these preservation projects because there will be no adverse effect to any known or unknown archaeological material. This was, as Andy said, the first phase. Oh yeah, and this purple line that, if you can barely see it, I'm sorry it's not very visible, but that's the boundary of the park. That's the State Historic Sites boundary. And as you can see, we're way out in the water right now. Okay, next slide. All right, this is all of the archaeology that I could put together at short notice. And I'm sure there's been more done, so if you have worked out here and I've missed something, please let me know and I'll put it on the map. So as you can see by looking at this, I've lined it up with, this is the current area we're working. I've lined this area up, all of this work with the Yoakum map to sort of give you a perspective of what we've done in relation to the battle. And as you can see, we found battle-related artifacts in this area and in this area. Battle-related artifacts have been found out here, as they should be. And what we found is we're beginning to trace a line of the battle as we go down, as Bill explained, how the battle progressed from this end, from here, on across, and then on down. And so we're actually beginning to follow that line, and so we can pick it up, and we intend to chase it further. So, next slide. So when I say we'd like to chase it further, we have future plans, some of them in the far future, some of them not so far future. This is a project-driven investigation. This is 2 new residences that we are going to be, oh, by the way, this is a 1920 USGS LaPorte quadrangle. So this is the new residences that are going to go in. This is also the area of the current wastewater plant. There's a huge little pond right in here nowadays. And so this is also the new proposed new maintenance compound. The old maintenance compound is up here in the Texian camp, and our intentions are to remove it from there and move it down here in this little complex. Okay, so other projects that we would like to do, here is a further prairie restoration. If you remember, this is where we did the other two restoration areas. This is the Vista Road here. Well, I guess that's the Independence. No, that would be the Vista Road. And so, and then over here, this is what we call the Adams Unit. This is the little causeway across the Boggy Bayou. This is the Boggy Bayou, all in through here. And so we would like to do the Adams Unit as well, across the bayou. And so that would involve mulching trees, same way that we did up here. So doing the mulching of the trees, and then come bring in the archaeologists to metal detect. And the same thing over here. And then there has been some interest in further restoration of our shorelines. And so this is a North Shoreline project that some have expressed an interest that we pursue. Okay. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Strutt. And first, let me apologize for my voice. I know it sounds awful. As Brent Leisure, our Parks Director, said earlier, I am the Director of the Cultural Resources Program, so I am responsible for the archaeology and preservation across the entire system of state historic sites and parks that Parks and Wildlife manages and maintains. As Ruth mentioned earlier, any work that is done on any state lands, whether it's ours or any other state lands, we must follow several preservation laws. One is the National Historic Preservation Act, and one is the State Antiquities Code. And in the projects that Ruth showed here earlier, every one of those we consulted with the State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO, which is the Texas Historical Commission, who is an oversight agency, and I'm going to have them come up and speak in a few minutes. So each one of these projects that we have done over time here was coordinated with the SHPO's office by informing them what the project would be, what archaeology we had done prior to ensure that no archaeological materials would be damaged, no remains would be left, or we would affect them in any way. So all of that work is done ahead of the consultation that we have with the SHPO's office. In terms of a marsh restoration project, we have to get a federal permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. Excuse me. And that requires us to follow the National Historic Preservation Act. And again, just like anything related to the Antiquities Code, we must do archaeology ahead of time to ensure that a project will not adversely affect anything in the ground, or design a project so that it will not adversely affect anything. In terms of this particular project, the Army Corps of Engineers, their determination based on our design is that there will be no adverse effect to any cultural resources, no archaeological artifacts, no human remains, or any potential thereof. And the State Historic Preservation Office received that information from both the Army Corps of Engineers and from Texas Parks and Wildlife. From there, I'm going to turn it over to the SHPO's office and let them explain their role in oversight for anything that we do.
I'm Bill Martin. I'm in the Archaeology Division at the Texas Historical Commission, and I just want to briefly explain what our role is in both the state and federal laws. Michael kind of covered what I was going to say, but let me just explain first of all that in 1969 the state legislature created the Antiquities Code of Texas in response to shipwrecks that were being looted, and the law specifically states that state agencies and political subdivisions of the state, like cities, counties, river authorities, virtually anything that ends in the word authority or district, has to contact us and consult with us before they do any ground disturbing activities. And so in this regard, the law also allows us to designate sites as state antiquities landmarks, and of course, the San Jacinto battlefield was designated long ago as a state antiquities landmark. And it also allows us to develop memorandum of understanding with state agencies, and we have a memorandum of understanding with Texas Parks and Wildlife. They have their own staff of archaeologists, unlike most state agencies, and under our agreement, they do the same work that any other agency does, only another agency would, say, have to hire an archaeologist, and that archaeologist would have to apply for a permit every time they were going to do a project. Say if the city of Houston was putting in a sewer line, they hire an archaeologist, they apply for a permit from us, because that's one of the other duties we have under the law, is to issue permits to do archaeological work. With Texas Parks and Wildlife having their own staff, we have an agreement where they get an annual permit and do that work. They still consult with us the same way, just more of an administrative ease of bookkeeping type of situation. So we reviewed this under the Antiquities Code, and then at the same time, because they need a permit from the Corps of Engineers, like Michael said, that triggers Section 106 of the federal law, the National Historic Preservation Act. And the executive director of the Texas Historical Commission, Mark Wolf's appointed as the State Historic Preservation Officer by the governor. So our job as staff is to review construction projects that either use federal money, permits, or licenses. This project just happened to fall under both laws. The review process was basically the same, only we responded to information coming to us from the Corps of Engineers, because they're the ones issuing the federal permit, and then it consulted directly under the Antiquities Code with Michael. As far as we can determine, this project is going along really well. As you can see from the information that was supplied in this presentation today, they've done a lot of background research and engineering research, and it looks like, in our opinion, there really is no adverse effect, and so we concurred with the Corps of Engineers on their determination in that under Section 106. Thank you.
Bill, please accept my apology for not introducing you earlier. We appreciate you being here representing the Texas Historical Commission. And thank you, everybody, for your patience as we went through this methodical presentation to give you some of the background leading up to this project and how this landscape has changed over time.